the publishing
Or
world.
tomorrow.
It's all like there's a bunch of stuff happening
Okay.
basically next week. So if you could want to wait the week after, that's fine.
Okay.
Or tomorrow.
No, it gets lost in no one's going to listen to it because it's Easter. No one's going to listen.
Yeah, I think that's true. Hold on.
That's a good point. That's a fair point.
Everybody will still be writing their Easter sermons and looking for the big relief that comes at the end of Easter Sunday.
Well,
see what I did there?
Yeah.
Thank you for showing me grace there, Tier. Yeah. Okay. So, welcome everyone. Our friend David Zoll is back on the podcast. He has a new book because producing books is like his thing. And so,
bam.
Yeah, the book is The Big Relief: The Urgency of Grace for a Worn Out World. And you certainly don't have to prove the thesis in your subtitle there. I think we can all feel that.
I hope so. I mean, I was sort of, I kind of take as a jumping off point that like, if my life as a kind of a, I don't know, affluent suburbanite guy feels this worn out, how much more must, everyone else's lives feel like? This is, if life in this quote unquote comfortable strata feels like this much of a pressure cooker, I can only imagine what it feels like in places where there's sort of bigger things happening.
Biblical needs.
Yes. I don't want to say there's no hierarchy of suffering.
Yeah, no, I know. Yeah, David, I heard you graciously spoke at a gathering for the Iowa Preachers Project that we're both a part of, and while we were there, you read from the afterword, the epilogue to your book, and I wonder if you would read part of that for us, because I found it moving.
Sure. What part do you want me to read?
The Brian Wilson part, right at the very end. Love and mercy.
Yes. Okay. I'd be happy to. Here we go.
And before David starts, listeners, there's not a wild dog loose in your neighborhood. There's a wild dog loose in Jason's house.
It's true.
He said wild dog. Okay, here we go. I can pinpoint the moment that grace took hold of my heart. I remember where I was, what I was doing, and what prompted it. I'm not talking about a religious conversion. That was several years away at the time and remains a work in progress. And I'm not talking about an intellectual epiphany. I still don't fully understand the big relief. I don't think I ever will, thank God. But something happened one day to plant the seed of this book, if not the rest of my life. The year was 1995. I was about to start my junior year of high school. The previous semester, I'd stumbled on something special at my school library, a brand new 5 CD box set of music by the Beach Boys. I'd enjoyed their songs as a kid, but largely stopped listening once teenage angst and Nirvana had set in. The box piqued my interest, though. More than half the material had never been released on CD. Unless you had a turntable, which no one did at that point, this stuff had been lost. The tracks veered from the sublime to the cringeworthy to the avant-garde, sometimes in the same recording. Other than the uniformly angelic voices, it bore little resemblance to the surfer tunes that had grabbed me in elementary school. I was mesmerized. The box took up residence in my room that spring, a pocket universe for me to visit whenever I needed escape or comfort. Cut to the summer and the news that head Beach Boy Brian Wilson was emerging from a long hibernation. The 80s, like the 1970s, had not been kind to Wilson. This was pre-internet, so all fans had to go on were rumors that a domineering therapist had taken control of Wilson, body, soul, and bank account. It was ugly and alarming, but also reportedly in the past. The legendary composer was ready to re-engage and had been coaxed back into the studio to record new versions of his old songs. The sessions were filmed in black and white and released as the documentary I Just Wasn't Made for These Times. As soon as I heard about it, I tracked down a copy at our local video rental store and pressed play. During interviews, Wilson didn't look at the camera, and when he spoke, it was out of one side of his mouth in slurred sentences that weren't entirely cogent. He seemed profoundly uncomfortable. The man's struggles with mental illness and recreational drugs were well known. He spent 15 years in bed at one point, but it was still a shock to see how much life had ravaged him. Then it happened. In the closing stretch of the movie, someone brings up the weird scene that Wilson endured in the 80s with the exploitative therapist. The camera cuts to Wilson, sitting at a piano looking forlorn. He says, I remember my assistant from the 80s who never left me alone. I said, I gotta dump my feelings on the keyboard. My chest feels so bad. My soul aches so much. And I just went in there and went. He plays a descending chord progression. And then, in that melancholy tenor of his, sings, Love and mercy, that's what you need tonight. The song, which I'd never heard before, was simple yet gorgeous, full of both pathos and hope, and it was flowing out of the mouth of a severely damaged vessel. Quote, a lot of people out there hurting, and it really scares me, goes the second verse, before Wilson repeats his prayer for love and mercy. The answer to suffering, both his own and the world's, was clear. It wasn't vengeance or punishment, technique or knowledge, but that precious combination of love and mercy known as grace. Other singers may say the same words, but hearing the message from someone who had suffered so much and was suffering still, I couldn't help in that moment believing it. It wasn't just the content of the song that resonated. I felt like I was glimpsing an underlayer of reality, something truer than true. Here, as elsewhere, Wilson's gift was so super abundant, yet so jarringly out of proportion, incongruous to the man himself. What was pouring out of him wasn't the result of training or background or effort. It wasn't something earned or cultivated, only received. There was no reason why this beauty had to exist. It simply did, as a matter of unqualified and unbidden gratuity, generating blessing to all within earshot. Somehow, none of the trials he had gone through, including the self inflicted ones, had been able to diminish the gift. Wilson was not only singing about the big relief, he was embodying it. This, I knew in my bones, was a thread worth following.
Hmm.
Is that the section? It goes on, but
Yeah, that's really good. I'm wondering, you say that that's like the genesis for this book. I'm wondering how much was that experience the genesis for your ministry?
Mm.
yeah, I mean, it was the Beach Boys are a real touch point for me, and you know, when you react to something when you're 16 like that, I don't I didn't like intellectualize it. I couldn't have described it like that, but the music of Brian Wilson and his brothers had remained such a touch point for me through as I grown older and still that I've had to sort of think about what is it that is sort of so profound about this, or why is this why does this resonate on such a deep frequency with me? And so I'm I may be reading slightly into it, but I do remember my heart being captured by something
Mm.
that I felt was like transcendent, otherworldly, that I had no other way to account for, that just seemed outside the bounds of decency and reasonable life. So,
And I have heard that getting to someone's heart is the way to get them to change. I think someone in your family may have said something like that.
well, that was I was when I was thinking about how to end the book. It was like I have to go personal, and I have to talk about where the state of my own soul, and as a former music snob, 45-year-old dude who has a lot of action figures, Brian Wilson is maybe a predictable choice, but I can't. This is just who I am. So that's where I went, and yeah, he's all about the heart. He's always been about the heart and the
Yeah.
spirit.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So at that same Preachers Project gathering where you read this excerpt, you also gave the counsel to this group of preachers that when you're preaching, which is something you do often, you start from the place where the text of scripture addresses you and your pain. I'm wondering, is that an approach you take to writing in general, or is it just to preaching?
I think it's just a creative standby. I think if I'm stuck or can't, I'm got some sort of internal log jam, then odds are I'm trying to force something that I'm not totally feeling,
Okay.
and I have to open up the veins a little bit. there's elements that I've tried to force myself in this book to disclose, to be a little bit more disclosure. Vulnerability is the kind of word today, but I just think you can tell if something is the other buzzword is authentic, but you can
Yeah.
tell if someone has skin in the game, if this matters to them. It's like in preaching, you can just tell if someone's saying the beautiful words or if they mean them, and maybe they're not so beautiful, but they're true. Like it's so I find the process of writing to be painful for that reason, because you have to get down to what you think you can honestly say rather than what you think you should say or what those people want you to say or what would be good for your organization or your brand or something like that.
Well, that's exactly what. So a few months ago now, like in my own preaching, I had that where like I'm preaching now for what I think people want to hear. And I told Jason this, and it was like I lost my voice. I didn't know how to write a sermon. I didn't know what to write. I didn't know what to do. And that was Jason's advice: just preach, write the sermon for yourself. Someone in the room's gonna, and like you said, whatever your craft is, like, for me that was a relief. Like that was the pressure coming off of saying, okay, I can. Someone else, at least statistically, someone in the room will connect with us along the way, right? There's gonna be one 40-something-year-old person who's struggling with the world coming apart at the seams right now, in the room, and that was freeing. That took the pressure
work
off.
with what you're actually given, and I think that if you spend your time spinning your wheels trying to be a different type of person, or a different type of preacher, a different type of writer, it's maybe that's the process of maturing, is to figuring out, okay, I can do this, I can't do that other thing, I don't know how to do that other thing, I've tried, and so and so is much better at it. So the big relief, in a lot of ways, the same thing was true. Like I am a person who's always had a very, very loud inner critic, and maybe everyone has a super loud inner critic. I can't speak for the whole universe, but I know that when I talk about the experience of being me in the 25th century.
We're just jumping ahead now.
Century, that it seems to, the deeper I go into that wellspring of like self-recrimination and internal pressure, that it does seem to rumble out into other people's lives. So this book was definitely written for me, first and foremost.
So as someone with a strong inner critic, is it anxiety producing to put a new book out into the world?
It's like a curse. I don't know why I do it. I think it's what is it? Probably 90% ego, 10% compulsion, or maybe I would say probably 60% ego, 20% compulsion, and 20% sort of just accepting the gifts you have and realizing where you find the energy. And I'm being slightly self-deprecating, but it is it's extremely hard. I've written a book about grace, and I've basically asked everyone to judge it. So
That's what Amazon reviews are for. You will find your judgment there.
I mean, I could name what I think are your gifts, but what do you think are your gifts?
I think I'm a good at translating sort of the radical gospel which is historic as well, the biblical gospel into contemporary terms. That having a high degree of sensitivity to the spiritual conditions of my neighbors and myself, and figuring out ways to get past the various defenses and huge what do you like minds, negotiating the minefield in such a way as to sort of pierce people's defenses. That's what I'd like to think are my gifts.
Well, yeah, you got it right. So good.
Okay. You're a good storyteller, Dave. I hope I'm more than a good storyteller.
But no, I think you're right, and to your point earlier about opening up the veins. there's a felt difference between reading about the doctrine of grace in a theological textbook, and instead reading stories, your own and other stories that you've collected, that are illustrative of what Christians mean by these bold words. It comes across that you're personally invested in this.
Well, good. I want to write books about Christianity for a sort of an audience that might be open, interested, but maybe not completely sold.
Or even, I mean, I think your books land with Christians who maybe can't articulate what it is they believe real well.
Yeah, probably that's my primary audience. I don't know. I was talking to, or someone was having lunch with Elizabeth Oldfield, the writer who's going to be speaking in New York, and she was saying there's a lot of really good Christian writers out there, but they're not trained to write for a non-Christian audience.
Mhm.
And for whatever reason, that's what excites me.
Yeah.
Whether I'm good at it, I don't know, but that's what I find challenging and worth doing.
Well, in the spirit of authenticity and truth telling, you can tell from the dog ears in my book that I have already stolen several parts of your book for sermons. So,
Praise the Lord.
but so we're recording on Holy Thursday. Tomorrow's Good Friday, and one of the things I like about what you've done in this book, is I think we have a tendency to reduce, in the church, to reduce the meaning of grace to the atonement. Like we collapse them into two words, and into the, like, one concept. And you've instead taken what you term the big relief, grace, and you have a chapter on the atonement, or on atonement, but it's not just limited to that. So can you talk about how you've kind of structured the book?
Yeah, I think I know you guys are devotees and friends of Fleming Rutledge, and I always thought one of the great things she did in the crucifixion book was to say that the crucifixion is not zero sum. It's not just this one thing.
Mm-hmm.
All of these things, and I think that the sort of zero sum thinking that is truly problematic, lazy. It's exciting, it's clickable, but it's when it comes to grace, there are times when grace as favor to those who've been rejected, that will speak very loudly. There will be times when it is acquittal of those who've been found guilty, like for those who are guilty. That will be times when that is very, very powerful. There are times when, what else do I talk in there about? Forgiveness for those who've got regrets. I was trying to basically look at a bunch of different avenues into grace, and pastorally, like, what are people actually struggling with? I mean, some people, it's this, they feel like they're bad, and they need to be told that they're still loved, but some people, they're struggling with feeling like they need to keep up and to be told that they can rest. That feels like grace, that's a relief. That's so it takes slightly different forms, and I'm not trying to, I don't want to fracture the grace of God. Like, I think it's thick, it's big. It's the big relief, and so it can hold all of these different aspects. And so I had a lot of fun. Play is one of my favorite chapters, and that's to a world in which you're just being told you can only produce, to the freedom.
Yeah.
It feels like grace.
Yeah, it's like, Robert Jensen says, that the gospel can never be preached the same way twice, because the law accuses everybody in particular ways. And of course, the correlative to that is grace is always going to land differently with different people, depending on where they feel accused or coming up short.
That's a beautiful quote. I hope that if people read this book and one chapter, they just don't get it, or it's just not that interesting, or it doesn't hit any kind of internal vein, then they'll read the next chapter. I think you just wait. I think I've tried to at least look at the different ways in which, if you're dying, the idea that there's a resurrection is going to be important to you. But if you're just more caught up in the performance aspect of life, you're not thinking about death, but you need to be told that, you know, God imputes righteousness to you no matter what, you know, like independent of your own gold stars. Like I wanted to sort of do a shotgun approach in a small book. It's hard because, you know, I thought like, you know, 60,000 words was the minimum I was supposed to write, but turns out that was the maximum I was allowed to write. So I'm sure I've
Were
got
they
some
afraid that
things.
people wouldn't read a bigger book?
Yes, that's
Hmm.
exactly what they're. People don't
Huh.
read books, period, and so if they have all, you know, the algorithms know, they know
Yeah,
all
yeah.
the sort of amount of shelf space, the amount of books you can contain in a single case, and mailings, all this stuff.
So what was one? What was there? I mean, you have 9 listed. Was there 10, 11, 12 that had to get cut?
Um,
That'll be a preview for book 2.
Not really. Not nothing
Okay.
springs to mind.
Okay.
I would have liked to go into slightly more depth on some things, but
Okay.
I also knew that that was outside. This is supposed to be a primer that's pastoral, that's
Mhm.
ready to go, and that people can sort of hand to their family members, their non-Christian friends, as something. It's like, hey, this is part of this is what the good news. When we talk about good news, this
It's
is what
it's
we're talking
this.
about.
So one of your chapters is titled "Surrender," and again, we're talking about this during Holy Week, and tonight and tomorrow morning, you know, in the gospel stories, um, it's not just Jesus dying; it's Jesus giving up control of himself.
Hmm.
Mhm.
You know that he's kind of passed from one person to the next, um, and so that you have a chapter here on surrender, and I'm wondering if you would read a bit from uh, my page 69, where it says "Pray for a nervous breakdown," or just talk about what you write in there. You don't have to keep reading for us.
No, I'd rather read for you because I
Okay.
That's
get
been edited,
what
right?
what the Christian faith has to offer. This is the section called "Pray for a Nervous Breakdown," and it's on the heels of a illustration from the show Parenthood. Um, what the Christian faith has to offer the world, in lieu of another formula or life hack, is the hope of surrender. Surrender is hopeful because where human control ends, faith in God begins. This is not faith for faith's sake, but faith in the God who creates something out of nothing and brings resurrection out of crucifixion. Come to find out, the opposite of faith isn't doubt, but control. This means that if life feels like a nonstop assault on your sense of control, then not only are you well within the mainstream of the human race, but you may also be in the throes of big relief. No matter how painful the breakdown feels, something is happening that technique could never accomplish. I asked my mother once what she'd wished she'd known as a young parent and if she had any guidance for my wife and me as we navigated that stage ourselves. She said something I'll never forget. My chief prayer for my children has always been that they would have their nervous breakdown early and with as little damage as possible. When I asked her to elaborate, she made it clear that she wasn't praying for her kids to suffer pain, nor was she praying that we would experience diagnosable mental anguish. Of course not. She was praying that her boys would come into contact with their own limitations sooner rather than later, such that they might reach out for a power greater than themselves before the stakes of such a meltdown were too high. She wanted us to have a relationship with God, and she knew that no number of parental lectures or Sunday school classes could make that happen, not in the same way that an honest and uncontrived encounter with the reality of a loving God could. Her prayers were answered, and I thank God for it.
Hmm.
Talk about, I mean, because I don't, I assume a lot of listeners are familiar with your work with Mockingbird, and they might know that you have experience working with students at a very prestigious university. Talk about the pressure that young people feel to be in control
Mhm.
and to perform and to achieve and to produce and all the antonyms to the big relief.
Yeah, this is one of the other sort of spiritual conditions informing the book is that I live here in Charlottesville, Virginia, where the University of Virginia is, and I spent 13, 12 really years working with undergraduates. And The pressure that they're under. I mean, I was a college student in the not too distant past, and I remember that pressure. But it's just ramped up. Everything's accelerated. When you once needed an internship after your junior year, before your senior year, now you need it after your freshman year, if not going into college. Um, there is no room for error. At least that's what they feel. It's tightrope, and one false move, and you're toast. So I think that that's probably compounded or amplified by um, the internet, which records things and makes things usually your worst moments can be shareable very, very quickly.
Yeah.
Um, but it also means because of that, it also means people just don't connect as readily with other folks because they don't want to, risk weakness in a public way. And so there's a lot of loneliness. There's students have less relationships than ever before. Um, they are very, very focused on the ladder that they are climbing, and they don't feel like there's much alternative to it. So I've watched the acceptable majors. We've talked about the death of the humanities. I've watched the acceptable majors just, funnel down.
Hmm.
From
Mhm.
people don't study history in the same way. Young men especially seem to all go into business. They don't even go to medicine. And there's a pressure.
It's like for adults, like the question is, what do you do? And for students, it's like, what are you studying?
Yeah,
Mhm.
100%. So
Status.
I find that to be, it's not just though in their academic life. I mean, it's in all areas. There's a the acceleration of fads, the acceleration of identity markers. This is how we dress this year, and this is how we dress the next year, and it's all it's just supercharged.
Yeah.
I don't know where it ends, but I know that the result is anxiety and loneliness, and that we're at the school where I am at UVA. They've just opened up a huge new center for sort of contemplative sciences, and where I think there's a lot of positive psychology, people getting some more help, but the actual school counseling services are backlogged for months,
Hmm.
and everyone needs help, and everyone's just like thinks they're the only one. So it's uh, deeply distressing to me. And so I thought with this book, what is there anything good that I can sort of contribute? And the one really good thing I know about is the grace of God. Um, and so I shot my shot, and that's it. That's all I got.
So I know
Like that.
you all have done a lot with Jonathan Haidt's work on Mockingbird. Have you been able to notice the how the smartphone changed the young people you worked with?
Ooh.
I mean, I am totally convinced by his
Or how do you
mindset.
navigate it as a father? Because my kids are
Oh,
old enough that I think I made all the wrong choices. But
help me because my 11-year-old now has a phone and we are screwing up
Yeah,
bad.
I don't know. My 8-year-old watches too much iPad. It's like it's if you want to find where every single contemporary parent feels condemned, every single one
That's it.
in need of a word of relief. I can't talk about the kids. They can. I mean, I can observe them, but I know that the parents, every single one I know, is absolutely conflicted and just feels terribly guilty about.
maybe that's the upside of Chinese tariffs. Like it'll be harder to get these phones.
Well,
I
I
mean,
remember
yeah.
I sat in a lecture that Andy Root did years ago when I was in seminary, and he was talking about cell phones, and he made the comment of like, look at anybody under the age of, I guess at the time was like 30, at a sporting event, sitting in the front row of a concert. They're not they're not viewing the event as older generations did. They're viewing it through the lens of their phones. They're holding their phone up, recording, and then watching through the phone. So that even in the most live event, that's the lens for how they view the world. And I've tried to like kind of keep that in the back of my mind,
Yeah.
but I'm also like that just sounds like bullshit. Like just get rid of the thing. And then my wife reminds me that we bought it for him. So then there's
I mean, I think
there's that.
culturally we're probably living through a moment that it will be seen as like we're gonna correct from it. Like I
Mhm.
don't as people might know, I have a pretty low anthropology, but it has been I've noticed
How
that
low can you go?
I've noticed that we have consensus building on
Yeah.
the effect of these phones and sort of the dehumanizing. I have 3 kids in 3 different schools, you know, one of which would be described as pretty left of center, and 2 of which would be described as sort of just pretty mainstream. And then I've got friends here who have, you know, have kids in the Christian school, which is a much more conservative school, and every single one of these settings has embraced Jonathan Haidt's book.
Mm.
Because it's just obvious. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't. If you disagree, then you must be receiving kickbacks from someone. 'Cause I don't you know.
And I think that relates though. So I think there's one way of reading like both your book and kind of Mockingbird's approach. There's one way to read it that like Dave Zoll for The Big Relief is out there looking for illustrations of what Christians mean by grace. But I think if you look at it another way is even in a distracted age of smartphones and the internet and all of it, these quote unquote secular shows and songs and news story like they're exhibiting a desire we all have for this thing that Christians have a particular word for. And so it's not you searching them out. It's people are searching for something that Christians have a word for. Does that make sense?
That's a beautiful way to put it. I hope that's true. I want to start with, you know, not with propositional truth. You know,
Mhm.
as important as I know that is, I just don't think it has much traction in the contemporary soul. But I know that anxiety does, and I know that sorrow does, and I want to sort of begin with those things and move towards grace, um, which is someone's called it a phenomenological apologetic. I don't know if what really even that means, but I think I'm interested in the emotional plausibility of Christianity that in such a way that doesn't somehow discount the objective elements and the historical truths, but nonetheless, you know, asks the questions, why should I care about this? The answer is because you're in pain.
Yeah.
And this actually has something to say to you in your pain. And we can get into all of the truth claims later. But I want to begin where people are. And that was my, that's because that's what works with me. You know,
Mhm.
that's the only real reason I do it.
And it's you know, your book The Big Relief reminds me of Francis Spufford's book that I know you're a fan of. That you're
Keep talking, David. What else do you have to say?
that we yeah that yeah you're showing how Christianity makes emotional sense, which is what he was after too.
People get
Um,
nervous. They're like, "Oh, are you just saying it's felt needs? Like, are we just saying some things to make people feel better?" And that's, I hope that's not doesn't come across in this book.
well, because you know, I think it's Aristotle who says that, you know, if the words coming out of your mouth don't match your facial expression, you're crazy. And there's a lot of Christianity that people encounter where the words they hear and the way in which you're proclaiming it to them don't align. You know, there's like an emotional dissonance there. And you're doing. I mean, you're yeah. I mean, you're
That's what I'm
show.
trying.
Yeah.
I thought I found Francis's book. I mean, that's why he was the #1 person I was hoping would endorse this book.
Did he?
He
I don't
did.
have endorsements on mine.
He did. He did endorse it, and so did Andy Root. So, um, but I love that book. I think it was so literary and a good writer that I basically wanted to do a slightly dumbed down Americanized version of it in a way
Well, that's bullshit.
that I could do.
That's just complete horseshit. No, you're. I mean, I think anyone who listens to you, you're a very good writer.
Thanks,
Your
thanks, man.
your prose is very good. Is that come naturally? Was that learned hard?
I was always told I wasn't a good writer, so this has all been news to me. But I enjoy writing, and I do a lot of reading. And I
Who
think part
told
of
you
it,
you were a bad writer?
my 10th grade my 10th grade English teacher, when
It
he
was-
said you should not go into honors English, you should stay in regular English. So that's the message I received.
Is
And I
your inner
totally
critic her voice?
yeah, she's like the sweetest lady of all time, but she absolutely crushed me. And it's just what happens when you're 15 that and you put yourself out there because I'd been like, maybe possibly could I be in honors English? I really like English. I literally she's like, no, I think you're good where you are. And then he took the SAT and like I did really well in the math section and not as well in the other one. So I was like, I guess I'm not a writer, but all of a sudden, um, this is where I am. And I enjoy it. I do like I like turning a phrase. And I've spent a lot of years with Mockingbird, at least the first 10 years of my work with it. I was editing all these writers and I realized, oh my gosh, it's good writing is more rare than I thought. So like you'd get
Ouch!
Yeah.
Ouch!
I'm not talking about you, Jason. These like
Man.
brilliant minds, people with like a zillion PhDs and stuff like that, and they'd send you a paragraph that like just didn't make any sense, and you'd be like, okay, where is this clause doesn't agree with this one, and so that was a good training ground. That was sort of my Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours.
So so the people that appear kind of in the Mockingbird constellation, the Dave Zoll sermon
Mhm.
illustration constellation, Francis Spufford, Tim Kreider, are they the writers that you like to read, or what other writers do you like to read?
Well, if there's like a sort of a non-fictional, almost like spiritual writer, like I think Oliver Berkman's great. I think Alan de Botton is wonderful, but I mainly would say that the women are usually better at it.
Hmm.
Um, I think that Anne Lamott is kind of
Hmm.
top of the in terms of you actually want to be understood
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and convey some emotional and spiritual wisdom. Like she does it as well as anyone. Mary Carr is right there with her. Um, I could go on. There are others, but I think I look for voices that have some humor, that aren't trying to be too. I used to love really, really clever writers. I was the world's biggest David Foster Wallace fan, and he was, of course, trying to de-cleverize his writing his entire life. Um, but yeah, those are. I like Alan Jacobs' writing.
Who's the Because I think I did see an endorsement. The guy who wrote The World's Largest Man. What's that guy?
Yeah, Harrison Scott Key.
Okay.
He's one of these great misfit Christians where there's a lot of us out there. I think that people don't realize, but he's neither fish nor fowl, and he's using swear words, and he's on a secular press, but he's making people laugh, but he's also talking about Jesus in a very serious and
Hmm.
non-condescending way. I really appreciate. He's speaking at Mockingbird this year too.
So what's your writing process? Because you've got kids, you've got Mockingbird, you work at a church, like you've got a lot of balls in the air.
Oh, well, I have to really write usually.
You're at the comic shop a lot.
I do love a good comic book.
So, like, I don't know how long ago, 6 months ago, maybe. I don't know. Like,
I just ran into Jason at the.
I was at the comic shop in Charlottesville, which is where we always go with my son when we're in town. And I came out of the bathroom, and literally Dave Zoll was right there. And I was like, "Of course,
I think
of
it's
course, he's
my
here."
son who's always there too. But it's Charlottesville, Virginia has one of the best comic book shops in the country. So
Mhm.
that's been a talk about grace. There's no reason it has to. Like, I don't think there are more comic book readers here than anywhere else. This is just God's gift to me personally, I suppose. But
When I was there, they had the world's like best CD shop. When I was a student, yeah, Plan 9 Records. It was
it's
fantastic.
the shadow of its former self.
At the end of every semester after finals, I would go sell my textbooks that I didn't want anymore, and then I'd go to Plan 9 and buy albums.
Well, you asked me how I write, and I like to have 3 or 4 uninterrupted hours, usually in a public space, where I can just block out time and try to reach some sort of flow state. Uh, because I have kids, that has to happen late at night sometimes, or
Mhm.
if I miss the early morning chunk, I won't get it again. I sort of afternoons, there are no writings happening. Um,
Mhm.
but I have, images and and sermon illustrations and little pieces of things I want to use, and I like to sort of figure out how the puzzle's going to fit together. And
That's
then
funny. That's how I
once
think of sermons too.
once it's done, then I like rewrite it almost all to get it to flow in a way that feels natural.
Do you write? Are you listening to music while you do this?
Almost always, yes.
Do you have
Ooh.
like a Big Relief soundtrack of music you were listening to while you wrote?
Not when I wrote it, but I have a Big Relief playlist that will be out this week that it comes out. There's 40 songs that are because I talk about quite a lot of music,
Mm-hmm.
and I have I think a phenomenal playlist I've been working on for a year, and it's got to be pared down. You can't go on too long, and songs about grace are, you know, there's a lot more about law.
That's that's true. That's
Uh,
true.
so
Um. So,
Wow.
Dave, again, we're talking at the height of the Christian year, and um, imputation, I think, is a word that a lot of Christians even don't understand, and that is one of the chapters you have in the book. Can you kind of make that real for people?
yeah, imputation is like when in practice when you're someone treats you as lovable when you at least feel like you're unlovable. Imputation is the fancy word is you're being imputed righteousness. God is treating you as though you had something you don't. And so I think about it in terms of the way that people feel very anxious about status, and people all up and down the socioeconomic and social class ladder feel anxious about status. You're very, very aware of who's above you and below you. Um, there's just as much jockeying for status at the public school as the private school, um, in the country as well as the city. So I talked about it. The way you can understand imputation, I think the most potent illustration in the book is I talk about my older brother when he got married to his wife, Sarah Beth. She had spent the last 10 years basically traveling the world. She's a photographer and loves travel and had accrued all these miles and like platinum status with Delta Airlines. And see, John had been staying put. Um, he didn't have, he was had to be in church every Sunday. He's a rector of an Episcopal church outside New York. And so they get to their honeymoon and she books the flight. They're going to Thailand, I think. And they show up at the airport and he thinks there's a super long line. He's like, oh my gosh, we got here too late. And then she says, don't worry about it. Look at this line over here, the platinum status line. There's two people. They go up there and says, John, hand her your ticket. And John hands her the ticket. He's like, thank you. Welcome. Let me process your check-in immediately. Thank you for flying Delta Platinum. Her status, her platinum status, she sort of enveloped him in it.
Mm-hmm.
Like he'd done nothing except for, he was loved by her, and so he was treated as though he had platinum status, even though it was really hers. And people get anxious about that. They feel it's like fictitious or something. Well, there's nothing fictitious. That's how Delta Airlines works. So it was a beautiful thing that he, through no effort of his own, was given a preferred or elevated or exalted status that he didn't deserve and hadn't asked for. It was purely at the discretion of someone else who loved him. So that's imputation. Like he experienced imputation in that he was imputed. That status was not his; it was hers that she imputed to him.
I was thinking the reason why people should read your book is so we're baptizing a baby, a little girl, Eloise, on Easter Sunday, and part of the prayer over the water is clothe her in Christ's righteousness. So it's impute Jesus's platinum status to Eloise, no matter who she's going to turn out to be, and the language of liturgy in the Bible, I think for a lot of people just washes over them, like they have no idea what we're saying. Either because they've never heard it before or they've heard it so much that it's lost its meaning. And just a little story like that about Delta Airlines like makes it real.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, there's all this like wedding garments washed in the blood of the lamb. All this, the language is there, But you're right. It washes over you. Dude,
No pun intended.
no pun intended. And if people like watch The Best Years of Our Lives, which is the movie I reference at the end of that chapter, if it doesn't leave you in tears, the scene I talk about, like, I don't want to know you. Because
Do you? I can't remember now. Do you? You Can Count on Me. That movie. Do you have that in here?
oh no, it's not. But that's a huge movie for me personally.
Yeah, like where Laura Linney goes to the Episcopal priest and like just dumps all about her like having an affair with a married man and everything, and is waiting for him to judge her, and he's just like, no, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah,
It's just amazing. It's just
it's an
amazing.
unbelievable movie. That was a movie that kind of brought my wife and I together.
Really?
Yeah, remember I was we were at a Christian camp actually, and I we were talking about movies, and she said like, I said, what are your favorite movie? And she said, actually, I really love this movie, You Can Count on Me. And I said, what? I Because I loved that movie, but I never thought anyone. She's 5 years younger than me. Like, Christians aren't always known for their cultural fluency.
To say the least.
I was so surprised that that was the movie that came out of her mouth, and I think honestly, looking back, she tells me that I remind her of Mark Ruffalo, which I do get quite a bit. And
Oh
he has
yeah.
this breakout role, and so I wonder if it actually worked for me in my favor in multiple ways. So
Well, I mean, yeah, like, that must be a burden that people confuse you for like, a man that women just want to be with.
yeah.
That's his
At least she wants to be with. That's all.
his burden to carry, Jason.
Yeah.
On my best day, I get Stanley Tucci, but that's Caesar Flickerman is not the goal.
My kids have just been reading the Hunger Games, and so.
But movies, yeah, my wife and I still say "I love you" to each other because Annie Hall was like one of the first movies we kind of connected over.
It stands up, that movie.
Yeah.
Whatever you think about its creator, that movie stands up.
Do you have like a personal example of someone imputing something to you that was not there?
Um, I have examples of. Yes, I'd say I had a therapist in my 20s who,
Hmm.
I think a good therapist can do this, even though you're paying them and all that stuff. But a therapist who, they might say, oh, I see something in this person that they can't see in themselves, or that they are actually seeing this thing. But this was a person of enormous wisdom and learning, and she was didn't have to take me on. My problems were pretty low wattage compared to what she was dealing with, and her name was Dorothy Martin, and she was a
Yeah, I read her book.
she's written some things. She's been gone for a while, but she imputed to me a kind of substance that I certainly didn't feel at the time, and that was what that's what lent our relationship such potency for my own healing at that point. Yeah.
So, so,
Mm.
so Dave, I don't want to make assumptions. So, make sure that listeners know um, how Mockingbird started, what your mission is, what you're about, and if they try to get a ticket for the conference coming up, what they can expect.
Sure. Mockingbird, we started in 2007. It was basically started by a bunch of young clergy in the mainline churches who were um, wanted to have a outlet that was not in the church to talk about grace, and the sort of really in its radical profundity. And because it was young people, I'm sure there was a lot of arrogance involved. Um, but so it what I look back on as I see we started at what was kind of an internet ministry or a platform before there was words like that, where we could talk about grace in everyday life. And once you started doing that online, we started attracting all sorts of people. And then before long, it's not just Episcopalians, but there's Methodists involved, there's Presbyterians involved, there's some Catholics involved, there's some sort of non-denom types involved, and it's not just folks in their 20s or 30s. It's all sorts of people. And so Mockingbird now exists as a platform for integrating the message of grace in everyday life in all sorts of playful, hopefully, um, sometimes rigorous, sometimes non-serious, sometimes just right down the middle ways. And so we have a print magazine, and we do conferences, and we have podcasts of our own. We publish some books. We have a very active website, and a constantly sort of evolving group of contributors. But we do this annual conference in New York City, which is sort of ground zero because that's where Mockingbird was started. And I want those conferences to mimic the experience of the website. So have different people coming at grace and God from different angles, yet all with the tie that binds is that you're not going to come and hear a bunch of to-do lists. You're not going to get a bunch of condemnation, no matter who you are. I think that there's going to be some play, some humor, some good food, and some really thoughtful stuff. And we'll have some non-Christian folks come in who are just folks who are doing interesting work in the culture that is resonant with our wider concerns. Well, some great music. Sandra McCracken,
Hmm.
she's doing music this year, and she's just phenomenal. But it'll be pastoral too. We have Aaron Zimmerman will be our chaplain. Jason Yu and Ken Jones and Ryan Cosgrove and Sarah Connell will be talking about preaching, for example. It's like, I wouldn't call it the Island of Misfit Toys, but it's a lot of people that don't necessarily feel at home in their church bodies. Um,
Yeah. So, I mean, speaking of relief, I've said this before, but when I first got cancer 10 years ago, and went on medical leave, I went to a lot of different churches trying to have some place to worship. And, um, I, it, I was in a position where I couldn't do any of the things that people were told in sermons to do. And it was exhausting, and dispiriting even. And that's how I stumbled upon Mockingbird. And so it was an outlet or a place of relief for me at a time when that's exactly what I needed.
well, you've been a huge contributor and a stalwart support, Jason. So I really appreciate that. I consider Crackers and Grape Juice to be sort of a sister organization, a organizational friend. Um,
We're not as organized as you think we are.
yeah, like I de-emphasize the word.
Yes.
The I think the conferences are fun, and I think that they're
Mhm.
also hopefully they translate into some form of relief. Though there's also usually a lot that comes at you. So
It's a lot of content for sure.
the challenge is
It
always
is.
to pare it down, and we
Mhm.
always get too many things we try and do.
But it's, like I've, Ken and I were talking with Sarah about this Preachers Project, and there's a Catholic deacon in the group. There's a gay Disciples of Christ guy from Minnesota. There are people from Lutheran denominations I've never heard of that don't, and then like Missouri Synod and traditions that don't ordain women, and then there's women in the group, and they're all gathered around this message, and none of the noise in the culture has interfered with their work together. And I think that's a gift that Mockingbird offers the church and the world.
Well, I can't believe that it still is basically working, but you're right. I mean, we're not a church. We're not deciding who gets ordained and who doesn't, but we can help you preach. If someone's asked you to preach, I think we can talk to you about what might be more effective and what not. So
Yeah, I was just thinking, so like we were all there in California in January. Mockingbird is the main venue by which all of these people arrived there. It's inauguration day, and nobody's arguing about politics. That's like a
Yeah.
miracle. That was like a miracle.
yeah, Mockbird's fairly a purple space, I guess. I don't have the disposition to be a firebrand of any kind. So um, usually, if folks want that, they end up finding it elsewhere. But
it's
I
There are
think
other conferences and publications for that.
100.
yeah.
Whether that's timidity or something like that, I don't know. I know what I'm capable of, and relief. I still need it, no matter who's in power. Um,
So, Dave, the last time you were on the podcast, we asked you the 10 questions from inside the actor studio. The question I heard David Brooks ask at a talk a year ago or so was when was the last time you cried?
the last time I cried was this morning.
I knew it would be recent. Like you're so open.
My well, I've gotten more open. My son and I listened to books on tape on the way to school, and we were listening to Ender's Game, which
Oh
is
wow, yeah.
classic. And little Ender has to say goodbye to his sister Valentine, and who is the one person that he'll miss when he goes off to space. And the way that's described, just it made me tear up. That was and I don't have a sister, but there was something really, really touching about it.
Well, it says a lot about you, Dave, and your writing that most people we've asked that question to kind of struggle to answer it. And I figured you'd have something recent to share.
Well, thank you. I'm constantly crying, which is an innovation of my 40s, by the way. That's my 30s. I think maybe that's what having teenage kids does to you. You just sort of rubbed kind of raw by life, and you can't hide it any longer.
I told my therapist recently, I was like, like I've been seeing you since like September. Like I thought maybe by like I'd get more teary by now. Like I'd cry more by now. And he's like, it's patience.
My wife was crying yesterday. She made me listen to. Have you guys heard of this podcast, Bone Valley?
Mm-mm.
Oh, I'm looking it up right now.
It's amazing. I think it's the Times that did it, but it's behind a paywall. But it's about a guy who forgives the man who was falsely imprisoned for murdering his wife. And then
Oh my gosh.
25 years into it, his sentence, some other person confesses to it, and this guy ends up calling him and forgiving him for. It's unbelievable. It's like one of these things like, how were you in the room when this happened? And the person set out to make one kind of podcast and ended up making a different one. And it's like redemption on a scale that is only possible in God's world. And you kind
Right.
of think,
Yeah.
this is stranger than a fiction. So she was crying yesterday about that, but I didn't have all the context. So she played the part for me, and I wanted to cry, but I didn't. So I got to listen to it all so I can get that moment of abreaction.
Dave, the book is The Big Relief, The Urgency of Grace for a Worn Out World. When does the book come out?
April the 29th. April the 29th, wherever books are sold.
And you're doing some book release gigs on the Eastern Seaboard, right?
One in Charlottesville on the 27th, then New York City, the first night of the conference. 29th in Roanoke at Second Presbyterian Church in Roanoke. I'm speaking. That's a Tuesday night. And then that Thursday night, Mockingbird Conference in New York. If folks want to come to that is free that first night. And then I'm speaking in D.C. on the 15th, I believe. And then in Southport, Connecticut in June 1st.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Dave.
Let me press stop.